Yá'át'ééh, my relatives. Good morning. This is Mark Charles. It is close to noon here Eastern time, and I'm sitting down drinking my second cup of coffee out of my favorite bluebird flower mug. And I have a few thoughts I wanted to discuss with you today regarding our founding documents and the impact that they are having on our foreign policy. But before I begin, let me do as I always do by acknowledging the people whose land I'm on. So I want to acknowledge that where I live today, which is now called Washington, D.C., are the traditional lands of the Piscataway. And I'm grateful for the stewardship the Piscataway have had of these lands for hundreds, even thousands of years. And I want to publicly thank them for that stewardship and just state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. Before I get into some of the discussion I wanted to talk about, just have to acknowledge, most of you probably know I'm a UCLA alum, and I graduated in '95, which was the year that UCLA won the national championship. Ed O'Bannon, Tyus Edney, that group of people. So, and I've been a basketball fan my entire life. I played in high school. I played recreationally in college. I actually coached basketball at my previous high school, my former high school, and I played for a number of years. I haven't played in a while, but I'm a big basketball fan, especially of college basketball, and I love the NCAA tournament. And so every year, most years, I have picks and I fill out a bracket. I haven't done it in the past few years as I've gotten busier with more national stuff that I've been working on. But this year, my daughter, as I might have mentioned before, she played basketball, and both my daughters have gotten interested in basketball, and so we play at the parks near our house pretty frequently. And my one of my daughters was on the team this year, and so she's very interested in basketball. So she filled out a bracket too. And so anyway, so both of us, I took her bracket and we are tracking them, and my bracket, and we're tracking them on one of the online sites. And anyway, I had a pretty brutal day yesterday. If you can imagine, most people did, right? There was a lot of upsets. Richmond won, Kentucky lost, Gonzaga had a really rough first half. UCLA, we barely squeaked by yesterday, playing Akron. I think it was until the last 4 minutes we took the lead and played like we were capable of playing. So anyway, my bracket was pretty brutal yesterday. I think I had maybe half of my picks right, which is kind of interesting. I had two brackets, two of the four quadrants that did really well, and then the other two quadrants, I don't think I had maybe one win in both of those quadrants. But anyway, my final four is still intact, and so I'll just give you a quick glimpse of my bracket here so that you can see it. But yeah, for those of you that's not what I wanted to share. That's my notes that I have for this thing. Sorry about that. Let me show you. There's my bracket. So yeah, I showed you my notes there previously. Sorry about that. Anyway, so here's my bracket, and I won't go through the whole bracket, but you can see my final four. I have Gonzaga playing UCLA. This is a rematch of last year's game where UCLA was actually a play-in team, and we went all the way to the final four and lost to Gonzaga on a brutal last-second shot. And then on my other side, I have Arizona playing Kansas. And then my championship game, I actually have a rematch of the Pac-12 championship game, which was UCLA versus Arizona. Which, if you watch that game, it was actually a very good game, and we lost, unfortunately. Arizona won, which is why they're number one seed in the tournament, and one of the reasons we're number four. But anyway, that's my bracket. So I'll share that with you, and I will try to make a few comments about my bracket throughout the rest of the tournament. Every year, I'm overly favorable and biased towards UCLA. So, right. And so I always, and I also tend to be more favorable towards Pac-12 teams. If UCLA is not going to win, I'd rather have a Pac-12 team do well. And so frequently my bracket gets busted pretty early on in the tournament. But I think this year I feel actually fairly confident about my championship game picks, and I feel fairly confident about my Final Four picks. So hopefully that will keep me interested and kind of emotionally connected throughout the entire tournament. But anyway, those are my thoughts. I want to see who's on here. Oscar, Yá'át'ééh, thanks for joining. Tam, hey, thanks for joining. I don't know, Tam. You're asking if Crichton is still in the tournament. Let me take a quick look and see. I'm not even sure who they played yesterday. Let me look very quickly. I'm just going through the bracket really quick. I don't even see them. Or maybe they're in the NIT, or maybe oh, there they are. They won yesterday. They beat South Dakota State, I think it is who they won against. And so, yeah, so that was obviously that was an upset. They were number 9 seed. They beat a number 8. And so anyway, yeah, so that was a good game. No, not South Dakota State. That was San Diego State, I think, that they played. Anyway, sorry about that bit of a distraction there, Tam. But yeah, so they are still in. They play again on Saturday. So yeah, anyone else? Final Four fans, NCAA championship basketball fans. I'm always love talking about these things. It's a fun thing to do, kind of a good distraction going into the spring. Oscar, hey, you're in California for UCLA and USC. I will be for USC if UCLA loses. There's usually a very big rivalry between SC and UCLA. I don't play into that really well, but I will always root for UCLA over USC until UCLA is out of the tournament. So anyway, thank you everybody for those thoughts. And now I want to talk a little bit about one other thing. And this is kind of as I've been watching, right? And if you've been paying attention to the coronavirus and what's going on, there's a few things happening, which is much of the nation. I think the CDC actually dropped their mask mandates for most of the nation. And so a lot of parts of the country are really opening up, some parts quicker than others. But even in DC, the mask mandate, where we've been very fairly aggressive about keeping our community safe as a city. We've had a mask mandate. We were out of school for almost a year doing virtual schooling. And yeah, DC has taken the coronavirus very seriously. And we lifted our mask mandate as a district about a week ago, I think, earlier in the month. And so you don't need to wear masks indoors. And, and on one hand, this is expected. The numbers are very low all around the country. However, there is a new variant to the Omicron variant that is beginning to spread. I think it makes up a quarter of the cases now in the US, and especially in Europe. And Europe, throughout the pandemic, has been about a month or a few weeks ahead of us as far as hitting surges and even having surges pass. And so they're kind of like a preview of what is coming over the Atlantic Ocean. And there was an article regarding this latest surge in the Washington Post. And it talks about what's going on in Europe. And one of the things, even our family, right, is as schools are debating lifting their mask mandates, and because the CDC is leaving it up to local communities and local school districts, the DC school district is debating lifting their mask mandate. And our family, as you know, I've been very cautious throughout most of the pandemic, including back to my campaign. And because every time there's a lull, they lift the mandates, and then people go out, and then we get another surge. This happened especially last summer, just before Delta, and again before Omicron, and now I'm concerned it's going to happen again. And so thankfully, because of the vaccine, most people who are fully vaccinated are not getting severe cases. It's the unvaccinated who are now beginning to fill up much more of the hospitals. But anyway, our family, we kind of made the decision that even though the mask mandates are lifting, we're still going to wear masks, especially indoors, um, uh, through at least the end of the month. Again, just to make sure that to see what is going to happen with the surge that it appears in all likeliness is going to hit the US in the next week or so. And so, and if you heard, even there's a lot of more high profile people who are vaccinated and have been fairly cautious throughout the entire pandemic. They're beginning to get coronavirus again. President Obama just reported that he tested positive. Vice President Harris's husband reported that he tested positive. There's a lot of other people who are testing positive right now. And so I want to just cautious people, right? It's good that we're kind of seeing the numbers go down. I know everyone is very tired of the coronavirus and especially wearing masks, but I want to just make sure you're aware there's a lull, but this virus is not over. And obviously we need to continue moving on, but I just want to make sure people are aware that, yeah, this virus isn't over. So please don't pretend that it is. Continue to be cautious about your health and to make wise decisions. Especially if you're not vaccinated or if your immune system is compromised, there is still a fairly good risk in going on in the world. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you and get a few thoughts out there on that. But the thing and I just wanted to give you some of the numbers. So in that Washington Post article, it said Germany, a nation of 83 million people, saw more than 250,000 new cases and 249 deaths on Friday. Britain had a 7-day average of 65,894 cases and 79 deaths as of Sunday. And the Netherlands, which has a population of less than 18 million people, they had an average of 60,000 cases as well. So again, in Europe, numbers are really starting to go up again, even though they're still down fairly low here in the US. So just be cautious about that, my relatives, and please make sure that you protect your health and the health of those most vulnerable around you. The thing I did want to talk about today, and I'll spend a few minutes kind of discussing this, is last night my daughter was studying for a government test, a social studies test, and they were looking at some of the amendments, and she wanted to talk to me about the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th amendments. And she knows, my whole family knows what I talk about. They know how systemic the racism, the sexism, the white supremacy is in our nation, in our founding document. And so she knew when she asked me that she was not going to get the typical answer that was probably taught in class, and nor was she going to be getting the answer that was going to be the right answer on the test. But she wanted to kind of have a summary of the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments. And I'm going to share, I actually pulled these up on my computer screen here. So here's the 13th Amendment. Of course, this is the amendment that most Americans believe and our history classes teach, that abolishes slavery. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist in the United States. They always tend to skip over the clause in the middle of this amendment, which says that except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. And again, the 13th Amendment doesn't abolish slavery. It redefines and codifies it, constitutionally protects it under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. The 14th Amendment, again, and this was the amendment that some people even will say this is what overturned the Dred Scott decision, right, which is the decision that said Black people weren't citizens of this country and therefore did not have the right to sue. And there's some opinions out there that says, well, this is the amendment that overturned the Dred Scott ruling, the decision. And again, because if you read Section 1, all persons born are naturalized in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the states where they reside. And no state can make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the U.S. Right? So this is the amendment that says if you're born here within the jurisdiction of the country, you are a citizen of the United States, making no specific reference to race or to gender or anything else. And so again, this is what most people think the 14th Amendment does, is it creates this great sense of equality underneath in our Constitution. But again, in Section 2, where they start talking about representation and how we're going to count the people of this nation, it says representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole numbers of persons in each state, again, excluding Indians not taxed. And then it says, but when the right to vote at any election for, and then it lists who they can vote for, is denied to any of the, and now we're talking about male inhabitants of such states. And so again, so now we're specifically excluding women. And it says that, talks about it being a bridge, except for participation in a rebellion or crime. So the 14th Amendment does the same thing the 13th Amendment does, which is it puts civil rights in the hands of the criminal justice system. And so, again, this was Abraham Lincoln's solution for what do you do with people of color when you don't believe they're equal, you believe they're inferior and white people are superior, and you don't want them to have great freedom within this country. What do? You want to end chattel slavery, but you don't believe in the value of Black lives or Native lives. Well, you put a clause in your amendment that keeps enslavement legal in prison. And the 14th Amendment found that was fairly successful. And so 3 years later, after we passed the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment again keeps the jurisdiction for those rights in the criminal justice system. And so, right, this is the problem. This is where Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton, right, they played this fiddle to a T with the mass incarceration, war on drugs, the for-profit prisons. And so the 14th Amendment, while it talks about this great equality and everyone's a citizen, it still keeps in place these very racist systems. And then, of course, we have the 15th Amendment, which I typically don't have a major problem with. The right of citizens in the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States, again, except for the way that the rights of citizens can be removed by the previous two amendments. And so again, this just now builds on this crappy foundation that not only gets established in the Constitution, but gets reinforced and even constitution protected within the 13th and 14th Amendments. And so, yeah, so this last night got me thinking about our founding documents and the mythology of them and how what you're taught in school and what even is expected to be the right answer on your test. As my daughter was trying to study last night, it's like, yeah, these documents don't actually say what we teach they say. And so, and one thing that my daughter was feeling, I don't know if overwhelmed is the right word, but that she was kind of pondering was giving the right answer to these questions, right? Which is that the 13th Amendment doesn't abolish slavery. The 14th Amendment doesn't extend citizenship to everybody because of the white supremacy and racism and sexism that's embedded into them. That requires not just checking a box, but actually explaining it. And so it's something you have to be very aware of if you want to pass the test. But then the thing I really started pondering both last night and this morning is the debate that's going on, and not the debate, the threat that our nation is pondering regarding nuclear war. Which is really, this is the discussion. This is not, we're not talking about it explicitly, but this is why Joe Biden is saying we're not going to militarily enforce a no-fly zone. We're not going to send troops into Ukraine, because Vladimir Putin has said he will use every means at his disposal if the U.S. engages with him militarily. If anyone goes into Ukraine to try and stop what he's doing there, he will use everything at his disposal, including his nuclear weapons. And this is why most of our European allies, as well as the United States, is saying, okay, you will support them from the sidelines. We will not go in there because, again, if the U.S. goes in there and we begin engaging with Russia, we now have World War III. And we know very well that World War III between two superpowers who possess massive amounts of nuclear weapons and both believe that they are exceptional and have the right of God to decide the fate of the world, that World War III will quickly become nuclear and result in pretty much mutual destruction. And so Joe Biden is wisely saying, okay, we're not going to go in there and engage in a world war, in a nuclear war over Ukraine, which I think is showing fairly decent restraint. The problem is he has said that if 1 inch of NATO territory is threatened or attacked, Poland, and again, Russia bombed within 10 miles of the Polish border earlier this week, then Joe Biden will absolutely go in there. And so this is where the debate we're having right now is about nuclear warfare. And what are we going to do as a nation? And I think the thing that I'm most disappointed about with President Biden, there's many things, as you listen to me, you know I'm disappointed about with President Biden, but he doesn't take opportunities like this. He doesn't take a crisis and use it as a way to solve the bigger issue or to at least deepen the conversation. Right? This goes back to this discussion on oil where he talks about, yeah, we're going to take climate change seriously, but the minute gas prices begin to rise, he releases the petroleum reserves and he does everything to make sure that we can still spend freely on oil, just like we always have. We don't need to change our behavior or curb our demand one bit. And this is the same thing with this debate about nuclear war now, right? This is the perfect time because it's not just what does Joe Biden believe, right? He's going to do, as he's shown, what he thinks the majority of Americans want to do. And he's not going to challenge the majority of Americans. He's not going to try and convince the majority of Americans that he's right or that he has a vision for us. He's basically saying, I want to do what the status quo is and what we've always done and just make sure that we can prosper. I mean, he's already said frequently during his campaign that the economy is his highest priority, and he's not going to do anything to disrupt that. And so even though he's concerned about climate change or other stuff, if it disrupts the economy, then his priority is going to be the economy. And so he's not taken opportunities to have the deeper debate. And the debate we need to have as a country, the thing we need to discuss as a nation, is this either implicit or explicit bias that says our survival is more important than the survival of the globe. Right? Because there's the natural assumption that if we get attacked with nuclear weapons, we will respond with the full force of our nuclear arsenal. This is what the American people expect. This is what we need to do, which will absolutely ensure massive destruction, right? And again, nuclear weapons are not strategic weapons. The reason they're devastating is not only do they destroy the environment, but they take the lives of hundreds of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of people, not only instantly with the initial blast, but then over the course of all the radiation and everything else. And so it's basically now becomes a test of who's willing to be the most evil, right? And this is where, as a nation, I think we need to stand up and say there's nothing that gives us the right as Americans to decide the fate of the world. Our survival as a nation is not more important than the survival of our globe. And we have to recognize that, which is humbling, right? Because we have all this power, we have all these weapons, we have all this money, and we have this sense of like, we can do whatever the hell we want to do, and we're entitled to do whatever the hell we want to do, right? This is why we act like we're going to fight global warming while we still prosper, instead of acknowledging the American lifestyle is not sustainable. Even President Obama has told children in Africa, right? If you guys all get air conditioners and cars like the rest of us have in America, we're going to have a crisis on our hands. And then a couple years later, he went out and bought a $12 million home in the Hamptons, Martha's Vineyard, which I'm sure had air conditioning. Anyway, it's this sense that we have as Americans, because we're told it from birth, right? That we're entitled to things that the rest of the globe doesn't have. And we're not only are we able to prosper, we're entitled, we're destined to prosper even in the hardest of times. And we have to begin to confront that. We have to not only tell people that, hey, we can tackle global warming, but we have to tell people, and to tackle it, we have to curb our consumption, right? We can't keep living at the rate we're living. It's not sustainable. We have nuclear weapons, and they're evil. They're absolutely evil. The point of nuclear weapons is to kill tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of people in an instant. That's pure evil. I don't care what your goal is. That's pure evil. And I think we need to have the debate. Why do we believe that? Why do we think we have that right to decide the fate of the globe merely because of our own security? But we're not willing to have, at least our leaders don't have the courage to have that debate. They don't have the courage to address those issues of this inherent belief that we have as a country, because we're told it from birth that we have these rights, and God forbid anyone would try to take these rights away from us or try to even enjoy the same rights that we believe we're entitled to. And this is where I think we need to have this deeper discussion about our founding documents, right? The reason we're so afraid to change them is because this is where our belief in white supremacy is rooted in our legal system. And so if we don't change the founding documents, then the position, the centeredness of the white landowning male will never truly be threatened. So we can do things above the foundations, but we can't change the foundations, because that's where white supremacy could really get threatened. And we have to acknowledge, not only does our white supremacy affect our domestic policies, it absolutely influences our nuclear, our foreign policy and our nuclear policy. Right? If we look at, let me just show you this amendment, and I talked about this a lot in the campaign. I talked about it other places. Let's look at the Second Amendment, which is one of our, right, this amendment that we fight about. This Second Amendment, it's basically 4 clauses. Size, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This amendment was passed as part of the Bill of Rights. The initial amendments passed to get the Constitution ratified. And it sets up 2 sides, which are the 2 sides the right and the left have taken right now. A well-regulated militia. This is where the left says we have the right to regulate weapons, guns. But they don't talk about the reason this right was given was so that we could have militia, which are civilian armies, which at the time of the writing of this bill were used for 2 purposes: to protect settlers from merciless Indian savages and to capture enslaved people who were running away. 2 of the primary purposes of our well-regulated militias. And then the second half, the right of the people. And the Constitution defines people in 1787 as white landowning men. The right of white landowning men to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is where the right, again, you look at gun rights in this country, and our nation is not fighting for the right of everyone to bear arms. That's not what the Republicans are fighting for. They are fighting for the right of white people to keep and bear arms. This amendment is so dripping in racism and white supremacy. I'm like, we can't even fix it. One of my conclusions has been, we just have to get rid of this amendment. And we need to treat guns like we would treat a car, right? Which is, if you want to use one, you have to prove you know how to use it. And then you have to renew your license every so often to demonstrate you're not misusing it. And this is the way our nation operates with nuclear weapons on the international front, right? Which is white nations, European nations. They're worthy to have nuclear weapons. God forbid nations with non-white people have the power. And again, the problem with nuclear weapons, even over and above guns, is nuclear weapons are about the destruction of the globe. And so there's this bias that says only white landowning men are capable of deciding the fate of the globe. If anyone else has it, it's a threat. But if we have it, if white landowning men have that, that's okay. And again, this is where we have to think, yeah, this is something we shouldn't even be talking about, right? Because even the fact that you believe you're capable of possessing something and using something shrewdly, and the only purpose of possessing it is to destroy the globe in the first place and to commit unthinkable acts of terror, which is what dropping a nuclear bomb does, which is what we did in Japan. That's how we ended World War II, by unthinkable acts of terror, killing 100,000 people instantly. So we need to have this conversation as a nation, my relatives. And I'm disappointed that President Biden and our political system doesn't have the courage or the wherewithal, really. They're not willing to engage this. And they continue just to leave these things undebated and work incredibly hard just to maintain the status quo, where we have to have these types of conversations. We have to challenge the American people that we don't have the right to decide the fate of the world. We don't. Right? This is what makes a lot of our arguments against Russia and what they're doing in Ukraine so insane. Is it was 19 years ago that under the lie, the false pretense spread by President Bush that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, we went in and we bombed the hell out of Baghdad. The numbers, we killed thousands of civilians. We did exactly what Russia is doing today in Ukraine, except we did it a hell of a lot more efficiently. And so, again, this is the belief that, right, only we have the ability to do these things. And when we do them, they're not wrong. And when other people do them, they're a threat to the globe. And we have to completely change that conversation, change that discussion. And Joe Biden and Donald Trump, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, have demonstrated over and over and over and over again that they are not willing to have that debate. They are not willing to have that discussion. They don't want to talk about those things. And these are the things that we have to start talking about. This is why I'm sharing my second cup of coffee with you. This is why I'm continuing to engage these issues, even though I'm not running for office and I'm not holding even a political position right now. But I'm like, no, we have to find a way to talk about these things. So I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank you for listening to these thoughts. And I want to challenge you to think about them and to work with me, alongside me, to begin to raise these conversations around our country, around our nation. I want to thank everybody who's been here. This is just a chance for me to air a few thoughts out here. I know it's been going on for a little while, but those are some of the thoughts I've been thinking about. So anyway, I hope your second cup of coffee is as good as mine is. I hope that you have a good weekend. I haven't been able to watch the sunrise this week much, for two reasons. First of all, it's been fairly cloudy here in DC. And second, it has been, because of the time change, I don't have enough time to watch the sunrise and go home to take my daughters to school. After next week, and maybe middle of next week, I think it will rise early enough where I'll be able to get back home and still get my daughters to school in time. So hopefully next week I'll have a much more normal sunrise schedule again. But let me look through the comments and see what people are saying here. Tam said, definitely, we need to change it. Thank you, Tam, for that affirmation. Shantana, I have seen the enemy and it is us. That there is so much truth to that, right? Where we believe that we're somehow capable of handling these incredibly destructive forces when we've proven over and over again that we're not. And we have to approach this with a much more humble attitude and a much more communal understanding. But anyway, yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I don't see a whole lot of questions in here. I am going to be doing my question on my Q&A on Patreon. I was going to try and do it today, but I wasn't able to get some things in place for scheduling it. And so probably tomorrow morning, I'm going to lay out my schedule for the rest of the month, both regarding what I'm going to do here on my Second Cups of Coffee and my social media, as well as on my Patreon. And so if you are interested in following me on Patreon and supporting some of the work I'm trying to do, let me share that link with you here. And you can always follow me there. And and so yeah, you can always, I'm fairly active on Patreon. I upload everything that I do to Patreon. So if you can watch kind of ad-free versions of my videos, you can also download audio of my Second Cups of Coffee and other YouTube videos that I put up. And so you can get the audio only version from my Patreon. And then there's other things like I do Q&As and I have other things going on there. So I'm going to lay out my schedule for the rest of the month on my Patreon site, probably on Saturday morning. I'm thinking I'm going to do a live stream of my Second Cup of Coffee and talk about my schedule for the next 2.5 weeks. But anyway, yeah, I thank everybody for joining me. This has been a good day to talk, and I hope you have a great weekend. And yeah, walk in beauty, and maybe learn how to walk in beauty together. Yá'át'ééh, my relatives, and Hakonet.